General Milley, and Secretary Murphy. As a proud senator of the birthplace of the Army Special Forces, the infamous Devil's Brigade there, and from Fort Harrison back in the 1940s, thank you for your continued leadership for our nation, as well as to our state. And thank you for what you do for our troops deployed overseas and those at home who must remain ready for whatever comes next, and we know there's plenty to come next. I want to start by talking about the Army Research Lab. As you know, the Army Research Lab has strong partnerships with universities across this nation. I'm pleased to see the Open Campus Initiative, including partnerships with universities in Montana. In 2001, the Army Science Board concluded that the weight carried by soldiers leads to decreased mobility and increased fatigue, as well as injury. But its recommendation that soldiers carry no more than 50 pounds for any length of time has not proven possible in the field. Despite a partnership with our leading universities across the country in 2009, and even developing some lower weight gear, our soldiers are still carrying well over 50 pounds under combat loads. Question, first of all, as we look at the budget, does the research and development in the materials technology this year, does it cover the full cost to get to really achieving the goal here of finding a way to reduce the load and get it under 50 pounds?
We think that there's a balance. We tried to flatline research and development. We've lowered the amount of procurement and increased O&M for readiness, but for research development's flatline. It's not as much as we want for research development. Our modernization, we need to invest more money in it, but given the top line, we have what we have, and that's what we put in, about 18%. Respect to the soldiers load and soldiers initiatives, we got an entire program that's dedicated towards developing lightweight materials for equipment, both personal protection equipment and load carrying equipment, along with weapons and munitions and so on and so forth. Anything to lighten the load of a soldier is important. It's a survival, it's critical to the soldier's survival. Since the times of the Romans, we've been carrying a lot of weight on individual soldiers, and today is no different, in some cases more, especially now with the introduction of body armor. So the research and development for lighter weight materials is really critical, and it has to do with the survivability of soldiers on a battlefield.
I want to follow up on a question Senator Shelby asked earlier about North Korea. Coming from a state like Montana, we have a third of the ICBMs in our state. We understand the power behind nuclear weapons, and what's going on in North Korea, I think, greatly concerns all Americans. On the THAAD system, I understand the cost is about $1.6 billion. My question is, South Korea is responsible for paying half of the U.S. Forces Korea budget. Would their cost increase with the deployment of the THAAD system?
I'd have to get back to you on the cost of that, Senator, and coordinate with Admiral Harris and General Scaparrotti as to the cost, and then coordinate with DOD. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Moving over to Southeast Asia for a moment. In 2002, the United States and the Philippines established the Joint Special Operations Task Force to help the Filipino forces fight Islamic terrorist organizations based in the southern islands. I spent 5 years working in Southeast Asia in the private sector. Used to spend time right where some of these activities are occurring. The Joint Task Force, made up of Army, Navy, and Marine personnel, began to withdraw in 2014, but just this year, those same terrorist organizations joined together and pledged allegiance to the Islamic State. The Filipino forces continue to fight these terrorist organizations today in their southern islands. We witnessed the Islamic State strike just last month in Indonesia. Their presence in the Asian Pacific is just as clear as it is throughout the Middle East. My question is, you're requesting $1.1 billion for the Army in the Asia Pacific theater this year. How much did terrorism in the region play a role in establishing that amount?
From an operational standpoint, it played a role. I wouldn't necessarily put a percentage of how much it played a role, but the three key things as I look at Asia Pacific in support of Admiral Harris and what U.S. PACOM is trying to do in the Pacific. One is a rising China. I think if we were historians in 2016 or flash forward 100 years to 2116 and we were to look backwards, I think someone would say that the definitive international political condition that defined the century will be the United States and China. Secondly, so the second piece is North Korea, and the third is terrorism, because we know that the Islamic State and terrorists are not just Iraq, Syria. They've spread into North Africa. They're in the Caucasus. They're in the Afghan PAC region, and they're in the Pacific. So it is a big concern. And that was one of the factors from a security standpoint to support our efforts, Army efforts in the Asia-Pacific region.
All right, thanks, General Milley.